Hi there, and welcome to the Paula Fiscal Show. You can watch the show on Sundays at 3 o'clock p.m. on Channel 29. You may also tweet us at any time while you're watching the show at Paula Fiscal TV, hashtag SF Commons. And I also upload all of the shows to YouTube. Just log into YouTube and put in Paula Fiscal Show. You will see that there are many shows that are political, especially this is the political season. So for today, we have a very, very special guest, a longtime friend of mine, and also someone that is very familiar with the political arena in San Francisco. He is the former president of the board and the representation of District 3, Aaron Peskin. Now, for those of you that are not familiar with his background, and I have to say, when I read up on Wikipedia, everywhere he's been and everything he's done, even I was impressed that he had so much on his Wikipedia that I am very, very pleased to have him on my show. So welcome very much for today, Aaron Peskin.
Thank you, Paula. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm delighted.
And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and ask you a few questions. And first of all, I want to start out with the fact that you do represent and are in favor of Yes on D. If you could give us a few minutes on Yes on D.
Sure. So for people who don't know what Proposition D is is a measure to allow increased height limits at a piece of property on the waterfront at Seawall Lot 337. But there's a little bit of a backstory, and the backstory is you may recall that just a couple of years ago there was a proposal to increase height limits on the waterfront near the ferry building, building called 8 Washington, and City Hall was not listening, and they approved increasing the height limits where the Embarcadero Freeway used to be, and San Francisco rose up and defeated that project on the ballot by a 2-to-1 margin. Subsequently, we came along, and I was part of the movement to put a measure on the ballot that took power away from City Hall, that took power away from the Board of Supervisors, and required only the voters to be able to increase height limits on port property that we all own. And that resulted in Forest City Development, who had a contract with the port to build housing and retail on Pier 70, to come forward with a proposal to build 30% affordable housing. Currently, the city only requires an anemic 12%. And the Giants have now come along with Seawall Lot 337. For those of you who don't know what it is, it's parking lot A near the Giants ballpark. And they are proposing 40%. So 40 is the new 30. And I think San Francisco needs much more affordable housing, not luxury housing, $5 million condos that nobody can afford. And so I'm supporting Proposition D.
And so, Aaron, I know that in the past years that you were a representative for all of us on the Board of Supervisors, that you have had a couple of topics and you've done a lot of policy decisions. But first of all, I want to mention that I did meet you in the year 2000, and that at that time, San Francisco was going through a lot of changes, and that was your first run for the Board of Supervisors. Can you tell us what inspired you to run for supervisor the first time around?
So, I was never really involved in electoral politics. I never expected to run the last time, and I didn't ever expect to get back into electoral politics. But 15 years ago, which is really a long time we've known each other, Paula, was in some ways very similar to what's happening now. It was the best of times and the worst of times. The economy was booming. Unemployment was low, evictions had skyrocketed, and City Hall wasn't listening. And neighbors and neighborhoods and districts didn't have a voice at City Hall. And so I, along with others, put our names forward, and I was elected the first time my name was on the ballot that 15 years ago. And I had the pleasure of serving with individuals like Tom Amiano and Sophie Maxwell and Matt Gonzalez. And we moved San Francisco forward. As a matter of fact, we put forward the first minimum wage that happened in America, something that's become commonplace in cities and states all around the country, even in the South. We actually put forward a universal health care system, Healthy San Francisco, before Barack Obama was even a candidate for the presidency of the United States. And today, we are in a similar situation where the Board of Supervisors, which is supposed to be a check and balance, has become too much of a rubber stamp. And so I'm running again unexpectedly to restore voices that are independent, that are neighborhood-based to our Board of Supervisors.
And could you tell us a little bit about the legislation that you put into action on curbing the Ellis Act?
Right. So for people who do not know, evictions have unfortunately skyrocketed in San Francisco during this booming economy. Last year, over 2,100 recorded evictions, and experts estimate that there are 3 times that many unrecorded evictions. Some of those are no-fault evictions, like the Ellis Act. Some of them are low-fault evictions. Some stuff as silly as people being evicted for hanging laundry out of their window. And some of them are fault evictions, non-payment of rent and what have you. But I actually introduced a piece of legislation which was successfully passed when I was in office that was aimed at disincentivizing Ellis Act evictions. The Ellis Act is a state law that we don't control locally that allows a landlord to go out of the rental property business and evict all of his or her or their tenants. And what I did was I passed a law that said if you had done that, you could not convert your building into condominiums for a period of 10 years. And as a result, Ellis Act evictions dropped precipitously the next year. I would like to actually revisit that when I get back in office, if I am so lucky and the voters will have me, and elongate that 10-year period to a 20-year period or longer in order to disincent Ellis Act evictions in the future.
And let's talk a little bit about your involvement in parks and recreation. I understand that you were very instrumental in San Francisco receiving a little chunk of money to fix up the parks.
Your memory is very good, Paula. Actually, my entire background is in open space. I got my start at a nonprofit organization called the Trust for Public Land, which buys land for parks and open space in cities and in rural areas and wilderness areas, and to this day work at a nonprofit that actually buys water rights to improve water quality in western rivers, primarily in Nevada and Arizona, as well as some work in New Mexico and Utah. But on the board, I was able to pass legislation doubling St. Mary's Park in Chinatown in size. We were able to acquire land that was former freeway land that is now Sue Bierman Park, named after great Supervisor Sue Bierman, who stopped the freeway from going through the Panhandle through Golden Gate Park. And we were able to get funding to rebuild the Helen Wills Playground, as well as funding to rebuild the North Beach Playground. And so, and I'm delighted to have the endorsement of the Sierra Club, which is an organization deeply committed to parks and open space and our quality of recreation.
And let's also talk about the charter amendment for the San Francisco Municipal Railway, where you secured $30 million per year from MUNI.
Right. So in 2007, MUNI, which has been chronically underfunded, particularly on the operations side, I put forward a charter amendment, which the voters, thank you voters, voted for, which actually brought the MTA, the Municipal Transportation Agency, an additional approximately $32 million a year that came primarily from parking fees and parking fines. In the old days, 40% of that money went to the black hole that is the general fund, and the voters agreed with me and put that 40% of every dime, quarter dollar that you put into a parking meter into the MTA, and that has led to some improvement in Muni, but there's still, as we all know, a long way to go.
Now, let's talk just a little bit about what right now is a very, very important issue for women in this city and in this nation. You were responsible for the reproductive health care buffer zone.
Yeah, it was kind of amazing that San Francisco, I mean, people in San Francisco don't actually know that we have actually had individuals who have made it very difficult for women to exercise their right to choose. And there was harassment going on at clinics in the city, believe it or not. And so we passed what was called the bubble legislation, which said that those protesters had to stay a certain distance away, and that survived court challenge and is still on the books today. And I'm delighted that we were able to get that passed and that it served the need to protect a woman's right to choose.
And now I'm going to ask you a few of your personal questions, such as I heard that you had started while you were in college working with something to do with tribal lands.
So actually, the tribal lands came later. When I was in college, I actually got an internship at the Trust for Public Land in downtown San Francisco and started buying land for parks and open space, including parks in San Francisco, including the Grace Marchant Garden on Telegraph Hill, which is a destination for locals and visitors alike, and subsequently went to work for an outfit called Great Basin Land and Water, which primarily buys water rights on behalf of indigenous tribes, the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe. For those of you who go to Burning Man, you drive by Pyramid Lake, and the nonprofit that I work for has helped the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe purchase over 10,000 acre-feet of water. That would be 1 acre a foot deep, which is about 350,000 plus gallons per year, and that's helped with their endangered fish and their quality of life, and it's great work, and I enjoy it.
And let me ask you a little bit about the small business in San Francisco. There have been a lot of complaints about the rising rents and the small business community being run out of San Francisco. Do you have any plans for controlling this, or do you have an idea of what San Francisco might do for this segment of our community?
Yeah, you're asking a very good question, Paula, and unfortunately, San Francisco's government is much more focused on large business. They're much more focused on the America's Cup. They're much more focused on large developments. And frankly, City Hall hasn't been looking after little businesses. And a lot of these legacy businesses that are integral parts of the fabric of our neighborhoods are being forced out one by one. We all know the stories, regardless of where you live. Some legacy business and institution has been under attack, and many of them have had to shut their doors because of high rents, including our cherished 100-plus-year-old flower market, which, were it not for those individuals coming together and organizing, and individuals like myself and former Mayor Art Agnos helping them, would have arguably been kicked out of town. And part of the solution is actually been set forth by Supervisor Campos on this November's ballot. It's Proposition J, and Proposition J actually will give legacy businesses the ability to obtain grants from the city to help stabilize them, and it also gives landlords incentive, commercial landlords incentive, to extend leases and in return receive a property tax reduction. So I'm delighted that Supervisor Campos at least is looking after some of the small businesses, but there's a long way to go, and I think City Hall has a role to play in both incentivizing good behavior and disincentivizing bad behavior.
And that is the Prop J on the November 3rd
Proposition J.
ballot.
Right.
And we did have a representative here from the Prop J committee, Tom Temprano.
Oh, excellent.
And I understand that once it passes in November, will become active January 2016.
There you go.
So I have a long list of businesses already ready to
Excellent.
Nominate for legacy.
So do I. I mean, and by the way, many of them are in District 3 in North Beach and Chinatown, where you have long-term neighborhood businesses that right now are really feeling the pinch of the affordability crisis.
And so now what I want to ask you about is, what do you see your role will become now when you get reelected? Will you be representing the whole city? Will you be representing just your district? Tell us what you have in mind for your policies and your new concept.
Thank you, Paula. When you are elected by a district, your first commitment is to the individuals and the issues in that district. But I've always been a citywide supervisor. I have always looked after the large, big picture issues. And that big picture issue today is all about housing and affordability. And there are a number of ways that we need to get after that. Number one, we need to build more affordable housing. We don't need more $5 million condos like they were proposing at 8 Washington that nobody can afford. What we need is to require the percentage of affordable housing that developers build to be increased. Right now, the city requires only 12%. In my day in office, it was 18%. We've seen, as we talked about in Proposition D, that developers can afford to build market rate housing with as much as 40% affordable housing. That shouldn't be a guideline. That should be a law. And I intend to introduce that, hopefully with the support of many of the individuals on the board who are supporting my candidacy, like Supervisor Jane Kim. And then in addition to that, we have to preserve the affordable housing that we already have. And that is being cannibalized by short-term rentals. And I have no problem if you want to rent your house out for when you go on vacation or when you leave town for the weekend, but unscrupulous speculators have been buying up entire buildings, kicking people out. The city's own budget analyst believes that that has resulted in the loss of some 2,000 units of rent-controlled housing. City Hall's response on a 6-5 vote, with my opponent voting the other way, has been deafening. They have actually, rather than creating an enforceable law, have created an absolutely unenforceable law that allows Airbnb, now valued at over $25 billion, to get away with this. And so one of my priorities will be to pass a law that is enforceable that makes sure that our rent-controlled housing stock is not cannibalized.
So does this mean that you have taken a position on Prop F?
It does absolutely mean when City Hall fails, the court of last resort is the ballot. That's what we saw in 8 Washington, and I absolutely encourage voters to vote for yes on F, and don't believe the counted as of today over $8 million that Airbnb has spent. If Airbnb wants to be a good corporate citizen, they shouldn't allow people who have 10 and 20 and 30 units. That's not sharing, that's taking.
And we also did have a representative each from the Airbnb and Dale Carlson on the yes on F.
Yeah, so I salute Mr. Carlson.
You can check on YouTube role to see those shows. Now, I wanted to ask a little bit about the people that have encouraged you to run again. What on earth went through your mind when people from the Sierra Club or the San Francisco Tenants Union or the Harvey Milk LGBT Democratic Club said to Aaron, we think you need to run again?
Yeah, I actually was having a very good time at the nonprofit that I work for, and I didn't expect to run again. But the unexpected is happening every day in San Francisco, and I felt that neighborhoods that are not being represented and voices that are not being heard needed to be heard again at City Hall. And in the last several election cycles, a handful of billionaires have been spending inordinate sums of money to crush neighborhood-based candidacies. And so I thought that I would come out of my political retirement and have an independent candidacy for the Board of Supervisors. And I've been delighted by the encouragement and support that I've gotten from neighborhood leaders all over District 3 who are on the business side, on the residential side, as well as citywide organizations like you mentioned, Paula, the Sierra Club, the Tenants Union, the Harvey Milk Club, the District 3 Democratic Club, and many, many other organizations and individuals, including State Senator Mark Leno, who I had the honor of serving with, former Supervisor Michaela Alioto-Pierre, who I serve with, former Supervisor Sophie Maxwell, my former colleagues, now State Senator Mark Leno, did I say former Mayor Art Agnos, former State Assembly Member Tom Amiano, and many, many others who I think...
let's not forget the old school legacy politicians like State Senator John Burton, Quentin Kopp,
who is now the chairman of the California Democratic Party. I'm honored to have Senator Burton's endorsement. Former judge and former state senator and former president of the Board of Supervisors, Quentin Kopp, former state senator Carol Migden, and many, many others.
And talking politics, of course, as you know, I've been a follower of politics in this city for many, many years.
Yes, you know it
Let's
inside
talk
out.
a little bit about your tenure on the Democratic Central Committee.
Right. So after I left the Board of Supervisors, I had the pain and pleasure of serving for 4 years as the chair of the San Francisco Democratic County Central Committee, which no one has heard of. It is commonly known as the San Francisco Democratic Party.
The DCCC.
The DCCC, where no good deed goes unpunished. And we kept the lights on. We actually managed to get incredible elevated turnout in many of the elections. It's a volunteer position that takes an inordinate amount of time and requires an inordinate amount of fundraising, and I'm glad that it is behind me.
Behind you, but still a great part of what made you what you are today. And I just wanted to mention a few of the articles that I read on in the newspaper talking about how your biggest asset is that you do great mobilization efforts with the residents. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Real democracy is all about people. Real democracy is about empowering people, about bringing people in, about giving them hope. And yeah, we had remarkable rallies. We had a great grassroots operation. Unfortunately, in recent years, the DCCC has really become an appendage of the San Francisco Board of Realtors and has been taken over by special interests. But this too shall change.
And talk a little bit about the artists that are supporting you.
Wow. I mean, the artists, which really are the conscience of this town and so much a part of our history, whether it's in the Mission or North Beach, the poets, the beatniks, they're leaving in droves. They're being forced out in droves. They're being evicted. They can't afford to live here. So I'm honored and delighted to have support from individuals like our former poet laureate Lawrence Ferlinghetti, who founded City Lights Bookstore, and Jack Hirschman, the poet, former poet laureate, and many, many others in the arts community. David Talbot, who wrote Season of the Witch, Rebecca Solnit, who is one of the most incredible authors that San Francisco is proud to have.
And let's not forget Paul Kantner from the Jefferson Airplane.
My neighbor Paul Kantner from the Jefferson Airplane, who I actually saw this morning at our neighborhood cafe.
You name dropper, you.
He's a sweet guy.
And so, at this point, we want to thank you very much for watching the Paula Fiscal Show. Remember to tweet us with your questions and your answers or your comments. And we would like to offer our good friend Aaron Peskin a couple of minutes to close this representation. Remember, keeping you informed, Paula Fiscal, Channel 29 at 3 o'clock p.m. on Sundays or on YouTube. Aaron.
Thank you, Paula, for this wonderful opportunity. And let me just say, I think that this race, I know everybody always tells you this is the most important race, but it's very, very important. It will really determine whether or not the balance on the Board of Supervisors is independent and a majority-based neighborhood set of supervisors with experience and the ability to stand up when those who aren't being heard are being shut out of City Hall. So I greatly encourage you to get involved in the campaign. If you have any time between today and Election Day, please join us at 1238 Sutter Street between Polk and Van Ness. Check out our website at www.aaron2015.com. And come and volunteer a little bit so that we can have a more affordable San Francisco for generations to come. I really appreciate the opportunity and look forward to working with all of you.
And now, because we have a minute or so extra, I don't know how that happened. I forgot to ask you about your position on Prop E live streaming.
Oh, Proposition E. So I'm all about getting people involved in government. I have read Prop E inside and out, and I think it has some unfortunate fatal flaws. If the authors of that measure had worked with experts in the community, it would be a lot better, and I'll tell you what the biggest problem is. The biggest problem is the way it is written. If we were having a dialogue about, say, same-sex marriage at the Board of Supervisors, the way it's written, somebody could actually pay a bunch of folks in Florida, not to pick on Florida, to spend 2 days remotely calling in. And I think that if it was written differently and it was only for San Franciscans to participate, it would be a fine measure. But the way it's written did not anticipate that. And San Francisco has been a leader on so many issues and has been attacked on so many issues around same-sex marriage, healthcare, et cetera. And I think the proper thing to do is to recraft that just a little bit, and the Board of Supervisors should pass it. It doesn't even need to go to the ballot. And with a little bit of a tweak, I bet if I'm elected, we can get that done in 2016.
So there you have it. The candidate for District 3 Supervisor, Aaron Peskin, and he also explained a little bit about Prop D for us. So we want to thank him for joining us. And once again, start keeping yourself informed and watch our show and tweet us.
And don't forget to vote on November. Don't forget to vote on November 3rd.
On November 3rd, 2015. And if you need a voter registration packet, you can find them at Aaron's headquarters. And I believe you have several headquarters in the city, right?
We've got 2 headquarters, one in Chinatown and one on Lower Polk.
Thank you so much for watching us, and stay informed.